Capital Record, where we defend free enterprise and capital markets because we believe in the dignity of the human person. Hello and welcome to another episode of David Bahnsen's Capital Record, brought to you by National Review. I am recording on Monday, President's Day, and we have a couple fun episodes coming this week. The one today focused on a topic that, for whatever reason, of all the things that I seem to believe in the world, many of which are up for debate and dispute and often can be controversial and provoke, argument and discussion and whatnot. It really does seem to me that the thing that has generated the most angst and pushback emotionally of all the things I believe has been my passionate stance on work from home. And the way I would put this is that I consider it to have been one of the great atrocities of the COVID moment. And the reason I'm bringing it up here in Capital Record today is it has become timely as a result of leaked audio, the link of which we have put in the show notes, from Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. He's come up on this podcast several times around some of the shareholder engagement endeavors that I've been a part of. But Jamie is one of America's most famous CEOs. For my money, he's one of America's best CEOs and has done simply extraordinary, unprecedented, almost indescribable work in leading JP Morgan to a place where the gap between first and second place in America's large commercial and investment banks is so gigantic. The way in which they have lapped their competitors, both globally and domestically, is unfathomable. And I don't think it's any small coincidence that the leadership of Jamie Dimon, who has created this Herculean success story of a bank pre, during, and post financial crisis, that he also is the leader who has driven so much of the conversation about Americans going back to work. So let me set the table here quickly. I believe even a couple other elements I've talked about on this podcast are atop the list of certain cultural artifacts of the COVID moment that have done extraordinary damage to our society. The COVID vaccine mandates that I debated with my friend Anthony Scaramucci on this very podcast a couple years ago significantly contributed to public distrust in science and in experts and in policymakers. It is largely the reason, even though I don't think it's entirely justifiable, the proper response in revolt of those absurd mandates is largely how we ended up with RFK, both as a sort of symbolic icon in public health movement, and now the actual official Secretary of Health and Human Services, brought into bear by Republicans and supported by people on the right. And this largely deals with the hangover of that COVID vaccine mandate moment. There was the damage done to school-age children by keeping them out of school, and the setback that they suffer as a result of their education and upbringing and development that we will suffer with for many years. There are so many different elements that took place out of the COVID moment. One of the issues was the discovery by a good portion of white-collar America that a lot of the job could be done remotely, that there was already this thing called email, there was already this thing called the internet, there was already this thing called the cloud, there was already file document storage via various devices such as Box and Dropbox that were on the cloud. From document management to communications and then video conferencing capability from whether it was Skype or the one that became very successful, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams and WebEx, all sorts of technological tools, all byproducts of the miracle of a market economy that enabled people to get a lot of work done from their computer, even if it were sitting at their living room or their bedroom. Now, the distinction that is missed so often in this discussion between the ability to do bare minimal work to survive and to thrive is a very, very important distinction. That businesses do more than just the individual work effort that is done by the part of an individual in front of their computer shouldn't need to be said. It is just so obvious that there is an integration and a collaboration that takes place in the workforce. It is so obvious that there is a reason that many white collar professions ever gathered together to begin with in what we refer to as an office. And the various conferencing, idea sharing, real time collaboration, out of which not only is business done, strategy developed, business operations executed. For many companies, particularly mine, that it is a client advisory business. There is a client facing component that is very relational, very human, very personal. But the traditions that formed over time and habits and practices formed out of a very specific reality about the human person. The time and place circumstances that enable us to collaborate face to face, real time, that cannot be replicated by video, that cannot be replicated by email. And there was also, I would argue peripherally, but nevertheless, in addition to some of those key components of how you build collaboration, culture, brand, platform, there was accountability. There was a sort of structure that went into place. Now, the caveat I'm going to give that is in the appendix to my book, Full Time Work in the Meaning of Life, the appendix was about this subject. The caveat I've given countless times on social media when I've gone on tirades about this subject. The caveat that I give all the time when I talk about this is that I am referring to those businesses and lines of work and individuals and situations where at the COVID moment, they decided all of a sudden, you know what, don't have to go to work anymore. When someone comes to me and goes, hey, I've been working from home. I'm a self-employed architect with no other people around me, and I've been able to do this from a home office since 1983 or something. And I say, well, I guess I'm not talking about you then. That each particular business has unique circumstances around it goes without saying. And the highly personal and defensive response that many people give to this stems from either their own self-doubt about the position they've taken, or the fact that they don't understand where this may not necessarily be about them. I believe that the society deciding in the COVID moment we don't need to go to work anymore has done irreparable harm to businesses, to customers, and to workers. The idea that more senior people who have already made it, who already have a certain degree of career security, financial security, um, subject matter expertise, and that they had decided I have now greater flexibility. And in order to keep this flexibility for myself, we're going to grant this thing called work from home to young people, to others, to newer people, or even a hybrid model, essentially surrendering the store and allowing people to dress how they want, show up when they want, do what they want, dramatically impeding the productivity of the endeavor, removing young people from older people in the workforce, removing newer members of the company from more seasoned members of not only the company, but the industry itself, putting substantial impairment on a mentorship process. and really surrendering a culture of accountability. Jamie Dimon's tirade that is leaked doesn't start with him simply saying, I want to control you and therefore want you back at the office. It starts with him pointing out they can't even get a hold of people on Fridays. The whole hybrid thing is a joke. The amount of productivity measured in a study from University of Chicago, measured in internal studies at JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and not just us Wall Street stiffs, but the really cool kids at the tech companies like Amazon, Tesla, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, that have all gone back on their work from home boasts as well, that have all realized they were getting a worse work product as a result of it. The productivity is dropped, and the reason is embedded in human nature. I did a debate with the Acton University in their annual Business Matters conference a couple years ago with a Harvard professor who was touting the benefit of a permanent remote work capability and made this very argument that I am not arguing for baby boomers like Jamie Dimon or Gen Xers like David Bahnsen to want their Gen Y and Gen Z employees to do it the way we did it because it's controlling or dues paying or something puritanical. It's because it's best for the young employees. That a 26 and 27-year-old David Bahnsen got to walk up and down the hallway and observe traders, observe research, observe peers who had more experience than me and be mentored by them, drop into offices, have real-time conferences and huddles and various elements that built a familiarity and expertise, a confidence, and then, of course, facilitate dynamics with clients, which is the core of our own business, that face-to-face relational effort. This is not a controversial opinion. Human beings are relational because we're made by God to be both individual and social. Human beings at times want to check out, be by themselves, shut the door, get some work done in isolation. The idea that people think I'm against that is just stupid. I myself choose to wake up at 3:30 in the morning every single day because I value the first few hours of isolation before the rest of the world's woken up. And I happen to do a lot of reading, research, and writing in my line of work. And I appreciate that solitude. But I also am in a line of work that involves interacting with teams, interacting with clients, interacting with research, with other divisions and silos of our business. And that requires us to be person to person. There's an energy, there's an accountability, there's a communication. So this is just non-negotiable for us at our company. But now what you're seeing is not just a business. I think out of the COVID moment, we might have had 30 employees. We now have 76. So we're obviously a small business. Now, I will say, even in our smallness, the representative sample I do have has never, ever indicated to me any pushback from employees, young or old, that are wanting desperately to not have to go to work. We have always had people embrace the idea that with the Bahnsen Group, you come to work. We are here together. We are mentoring younger people. We are sharing ideas. There is a relational component, not only between us and our clients, but between us and each other. And yet, 76 people used to be less than that, you could argue is different. Jamie's dealing with the most employees of any big financial institution in America. He's dealing with the epicenter of global finance and sharing the exact same takeaway that the Zoom does not cover the benefit of person-to-person, face-to-face, physical presence and communication, that the accountability, the idea of actually being at work, being at your desk, separate from the distractions of home and recreation and relaxation, are vital. We are made this way. Now, I understand that there are family farms where you lived on the farm, you were in a different, not only culture and a different state of the economy, but there was a very different functionality to what was being done in that endeavor. Nobody has ever argued that those white collar employees at a JP Morgan or at a Microsoft that have now been told to get back to work, that prior to that, there were blue collar people on an assembly line or factory that were given the option to not come to work. Everyone's always acknowledged the dynamic and reality of these lines of work required physical presence. It almost doesn't need to be said because it's obvious. But my point here is that it was creating a caste system. That there was a physicality that kept the conversation from ever having with many lines of work, often blue collar, and that certain white collar professions said, well, we can be exempt from it. But of course, you could only be exempt from it suboptimally. And this is to me what Jamie's captured that brings back the ethos of conservatism. When we conserve tradition, this doesn't mean you hold on to antiquated business practices. Conserving traditions that deserve to be updated is not a worthwhile endeavor. It is counterproductive. The question is the burden you put on replacing a tradition. When do you know when the time to conserve is over? That requires you to have a gratitude and a historical appreciation for how something came to be a tradition to begin with. Initially, in the summer of 2020, when I began appearing on Fox and Friends about this and I began writing about it, much of it was I took for granted companies knew it was best for them, for their people to be in work, but argued they needed to now accelerate that because they were doing so much damage to the communities around their offices, particularly in big cities, where I'm sitting here recording at my office in Midtown Manhattan, and just down downstairs from us, you had hot dog vendors and dry cleaners and bus boys at restaurants and bartenders and other things that their lives were just completely ruined. Their career and their livelihood was totally thrown out because white collar guys at the law firms and finance firms around did not have their people coming back to work. There's an ecosystem in a lot of cities that I cared about, in the gyms and the health clubs and the fitness centers, along with the service businesses and laundromats and other components that all filled together. And it took a long time to get many of these places back up and running. New York came back quicker than other cities. Other cities, because of peripheral complexity around the George Floyd riots and some of the other things that went on in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco after, kind of during the COVID moment, complicated it further. New York got up and running in a way that people predicted wasn't going to happen, that I never even thought for a second was negotiable. But it took longer than it should have. And we actually had a relationship with a very large asset manager. Their old office happens to be kitty corner from where I'm sitting right now, where we removed hundreds of millions of dollars of client money from their management because they were still, almost 2 years after the COVID moment, not back to work. That's how strongly we feel about this issue. But that initial instinct that this was necessary just in terms of being good citizens and caring for other actors in the community is not the argument that a guy like Jamie Dimon's making now. And it's not the argument that I've held on to now that much of our world is back up and running. Obviously, the hospitality business, those dry cleaners and these other peripheral people who were being victimized by shutdowns previously. At this point, I'm talking about what's best for business, what's best for human flourishing, what's best for career development, what's best for young people being mentored, what's best for companies serving their customers, what's best for businesses actually being able to build a culture. A culture in a company is shared experiences. Shared experiences don't happen on a Zoom. This is a vital issue for those that want a dynamic labor force, for those who want an optimal economy where our free enterprise system flourishes because everybody is giving it their best. There is absolutely no way to argue that we are giving it our best by allowing people to work devoid of mentorship, devoid of collaboration, devoid of best practices. That burden for a conservative to know whether or not a tradition is worth conserving, that burden is alive here, and nobody is taking on the mantle of arguing that it has changed, died, or become antiquated. Best case, they've argued we have increased flexibility, that when there is a need, because we're at home sick, or there is a scheduling challenge, or shut down on the subway, or the various things that allow us at times a need to work from home here and there. We now know, as a result of the experience in the pandemic, that we can. What Jamie Dimon, and if I can dare to include myself in his company, David Bahnsen, are arguing is that for those who care about what's best for the human person, for their career success, the journey that they want to have in their life, and for the business of business, which is ideally forming and creating and cultivating and protecting and enhancing a culture within your company for the aim of producing goods and services that meet the needs of humanity, there's no question it's best done together in person. Thank you so much for listening to David Bahnsen's Capital Record. Thank you, Jamie Dimon, for being a leader in this subject. We welcome your feedback all the time. Share this far and wide. Look forward to being with you in a couple of days. Take care.